Yeah, sitting in the front row would be great. Because we are videotaping this, and usually in our district store manager meetings, and I'm trying to make it look filled, like we filled the hall. So after we talk for about 25 minutes with me, then we'll break and we'll get a glass of wine or whatever you prefer from the meager selection we have. And then we'll sit back down and have like 15 minutes of just informal questions and answers. And then we'll that'll do that for like 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll adjourn. And if you want to stay and discuss things casually, you can. Pat, how's that volume level? You can? Good. So we're going to wait for a few more minutes. You know, one thing we might do is just ask you if the lights are bothering anybody in particular, where it's bouncing in your eyes or something. And if so, we could readjust slightly. Come on in. No problem, Doris. Hey, Doris, I'm going to put you in this slot right here next to Gary, if you don't mind. So, Catherine, were you nervous? So was it as small as you thought? Was there a third person before? Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I kind of, they're great. I mean, this is so contemporary, and this is easy. It's what's so funny is, yeah, the platinum, I'm not used to a lot of silver color. Yes. It looks almost sacrilegious. They don't go together. It's sort of like it's all around just doing that look.
You're walking too far away from yourself. Yeah, just kind of belt. Really jacket and tie or yeah, it was just funny that Deborah's built it up now. She's probably just using it right now.
Yeah, I just looked at it and I was like, I think you should keep it. I can't imagine.
all depends on the day. You know, the Bay Area, we can have very windy days.
This big, they usually wear it.
But you know, big airplanes can have that.
Big as like, okay.
Derek, how's that? Testing 1, 2, 3? Sounds good. Okay. What do you think, Joe? Hey, Derek, give me a favor. All right. Thank you very much for coming today. September 1st, is it? I don't know how you feel. I feel pretty good today. I got a good night's sleep last night. Slept like a lawyer. You know how a lawyer sleeps? First you lie on one side, then you lie on the other. That was in Herb Cain today. I thought it was cute. I was a lawyer once, and I decided to go into business. And that was about 10 years ago, 1977, spring of 1977. And it's been about 10 years since our company went into business, and this has been one of the most interesting, one of the most difficult, and one of the most exciting periods in our company history. So I thought it would be good if we got together today to talk about where we have been, how we got there, and where we seem to be going. Before launching into that, let me just mention a few things that are interesting. One is the promotion of Charlotte Van to manager of telemarketing, which you know about, and she has done a super job, and I want to thank her for that. Some new people who you may not know as well, Glenn Atwood. Glenn, would you just look at everybody, maybe stand up so they can see your face, is our new manager of real estate. And Tom Greenhaw, where's Tom? Right there, is manager of our corporate accounts, premium and incentive sales. And we hope this is going to be a very exciting new area for us. So Tom has joined the marketing department as the manager of that. And Jim Foster, who has been around a while, right there, is manager of quality assurance. And we can use that. He'll be working with the products to make sure that products are up to the standards that we expect. So 10 years ago, a little over 10 years really, April 1977, we began with a magazine ad. And that seems like a small beginning, and it was just 5 years ago that we had one retail store. And it was just 3 years ago that we had 4 retail stores. In 1984, well, 3.5 years ago. So it seems hard to believe that today, as we sit here, now we have over 50 retail stores. Some other milestones have been passed. It was about 2 years ago that we passed 100 million in sales. And for a company that only began in April 1977, that was a tremendous accomplishment. This year, we will hit 200 million of sales. So that in itself is it's a fantastic accomplishment. And we have successful catalogs in Germany and Switzerland, very successful. And we have our first store in Osaka, Japan, and we have a Japanese catalog. And someday we'll probably have stores in other European cities and probably in Canada. And we have seen really what you would have to say is extraordinary growth and achievement over this 10 years. And growth really has created the opportunity that has been the SHRP image for all of us. It's created a lot of responsibility for different people. It's created our salaries, obviously. It's created the offices that we work in and what we do every day, the people we work with. It's created bonuses, and it's created, more importantly than anything, the opportunity to grow in the future. And we have grown fairly consistently. You know, our sales have grown almost every single year for the 10 years we've been in business. I don't think there's a single year when the sales didn't grow. I think one year they grew very little, but every year they grew from the first day we went into business. And the profits grew almost every year. Not always, but almost every year the profits grew. And that's probably the nature of growth. That growth goes in fits and starts, and sometimes it grows more rapidly and sometimes it grows more slowly. It's interesting if you think about the fact that in the last 9 months, or if you want to generalize more broadly, in the last year, we have had the highest levels of accomplishment, the highest highs in this company that we have ever had. And we've also had some of the lowest lows that we've ever had. Last December, or last January to be exact, we finished our fourth quarter of the fiscal year, which was last year, calendar 1987. And we finished the best fourth quarter and the best year that we had ever had in the history of our company, by far. Our sales were up 30% to $161 million, and the profits were up 70%. It was incredible to be up 70%, and the number per share was 70 cents a share. That was an amazing accomplishment. It was the highest we'd ever done in our lives, and we didn't report that until about last March, 6 months ago. So it was just 6 months ago that we were patting ourselves on the back and saying we had done the best we had ever done in our lives, and the best this company has ever done in its corporate history. And it was just 3 months after that that we sunk to one of the lowest lows, because we then reported the biggest quarterly loss in our company's history. And we followed it up the next quarter, the second quarter of the current year, 1988 calendar year, by reporting the second biggest quarterly loss we had ever had. So you have to marvel at the fact that we've had really the highest high in our company's history and two of the lowest lows. Now let's put the lows in perspective. We are still expecting that this year will be the second most profitable year in our history, which is interesting in itself. I mean, we are a company that is still very profitable, and we are expecting to report the second best year we've ever had in earnings and the very best year we've ever had in sales. So we need to put these things a little bit in perspective. Our stock price for a moment, if we can talk about that. We've hit the highest highs and the lowest lows there. It was just a year and 3 months ago that we went public, sold our shares to the public for the first time, and hit the highest high in our stock, 10 7/8. And it was just this morning that we hit the lowest low in 9 months, 5. So it's hard to believe that all in 14 months we could have our highest and our lowest. I want to take a time out for a moment, if I can, and talk about some of the basic terms that I want us all to learn about for today and for the future, because I think that the better we all understand them, the better that we can manage our business to get the result we want. So I'm going to just take a moment, if I can, and digress here for just a second. Let's just talk about a few of these terms. Shares, very quickly. Shares are simply the unit that we use to talk about the ownership of the company. In our company, we have 8 million shares, and different people own different amounts. But no one really owns the company. They just own a piece of the company by owning a share. We all know sort of what a share is. And it's usually evidenced by a certificate. The owners are the people that own the shares, okay? The owners own those pieces of paper called shares. The managers are the people who actually run the company. And that is pretty much the people in this room plus the managers out in our retail store group. The regional managers, the district managers, and the store managers. But other than the company managers we have here, and other than the store managers, that is the management of this company. Sometimes the owners are also the managers. In our case, we have a fairly widespread ownership among managers. Everybody in this room either has shares they own right now because they bought them a long time ago, or they have options to own shares, or if they're brand new with us, they will be given options to own shares. The options, by the way, we've talked about before, but let's just reiterate, an option is a right to own shares. The nice thing about that is it doesn't cost you anything to have the option, and you only need to use the option if it's worth something. If it's worth something, then use it. If it's not worth something, leave it in the drawer. It's free, doesn't cost you anything. Where the people that own shares, probably they paid for them. And if it goes down to zero, they'll be sorry that they ever bought them. So in a way, an option's better than owning shares because the option doesn't cost anything. It can only be a positive. It can never be a negative. But actually owning a share, it could be a negative if it ever dropped below what you paid for it. And there may be people right here who have already bought shares at a higher price than what it is today. So there's owners and there's managers, and in our company, a lot of the owners are managers, and a lot of the managers are owners. I might just mention, it's sort of interesting to notice that the percentage of ownership is different. The people in our company, the managers in our company, and some supervisors, and a few others, I think, own about 5% of our total shares, or have options on up to 5% of the total. The public, people that were offered shares last April, a year and 2 months ago, a year and 3 months ago, or that have bought since then, that is about 15% of the total shares. 15%. I own about 70% still, and there are other people who own a little percent here or there. But basically, it's the managers of the company, me, and the 15% that's the public, the people that buy and sell every day that shows up in the Wall Street Journal. A few other quick terms. Earnings. Earnings are simply the total earnings of the company divided by those 8 million shares. So last year we earned about $5.5 million divided by 8 million shares. Comes out to exactly 70 cents per share, 5.6 million. And they always talk about earnings per share. They never talk about the total because they trade the shares every day. They don't trade the company as a whole. They just trade the individual shares. So they always compute everything on a per share basis. That is earnings per share. And ours were 70 cents last year. And then the other term that's sort of interesting, two other terms, is expense. Because when you talk about income, the subject of expense often comes up. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then the last term I want to discuss, and then we'll get on with this presentation, is what they use to compute the price of the stock. Because, you know, the price is not arbitrary. I mean, it is arbitrary in the sense that it goes up and down, but there's some logic behind why the price is what it is every day. And generally, it's based on a ratio, like a lot of things in life. And the name of the ratio is the price-earnings ratio. In other words, they take the earnings that we've reported, say 70 cents last year, and they apply a ratio to it. And that generally comes up with the price. It's that simple. And what ratio they apply varies dramatically from company to company. When I say who they are, I'm talking about the 15% that own it in the public. It's interesting, you know, every day a few hundred shares trade in the Wall Street Journal, or are reported to trade in the Wall Street Journal, or a few thousand shares some days, and some days even 50,000 shares. But the interesting thing is there's about 1.25 million shares in public hands. And every day a few thousand of those trade. And those few thousand people set the price for everybody else. For all the people that haven't traded that day, for me, I own 70% of the company, and they set my price every day, and they set your price. And the majority of us never traded a share. We didn't even quote a price, and yet they are setting the price every day. This few people, it may only be 10 people a day that actually buy and sell some. They're the ones that set the price. They don't really mean to, it's just they're the only ones that are reported. So whatever price they buy or sell at, that's what's printed in the journal every day, and that's the price. It's sort of like owning a house, and you read that your neighbor sold his house for a certain price, so you assume your house is worth about the same. Now, you may think your house is different than his and should have some different ratios applied to it, but there are some general parameters that hold for everybody. And in this business, in the stock business, the price-earnings ratio is a commonly used ratio. And historically, that number has been around 15. If you look at the history of Wall Street for the last 40 years, 15 is the number that comes up a lot. They take our earnings of 70 cents a share, they would multiply it by traditionally 15 and come up with $10.50. And they would say the SHRP image should trade at 10.50. Today it was at 5, however. Now, sometimes a company is very highly regarded, and they give it a much higher multiple. I just checked the journal yesterday and wrote down a few. Like Walmart, the famous discounter that you've all heard of. Walmart is the discounter out of Arkansas, and they've had a tremendous history for 20 years. They traded 30 times earnings. So if our stock was valued at a multiple of 30, we would take 70 cents times 30 is $21. They would trade our stock at $21. If they gave us the same multiple as Williams-Sonoma, a local company, a very fine mail order and retail company, well-managed, long-term company, that is valued at 25 times earnings. And if our stock was valued at 25 times earnings, we would be trading at 17. 70 cents times 25. But we're not. We're trading at 5. The gap, which got to astronomical heights, it got as high as something like 50 times earnings last August before the crash. Even today, as we sit here, is still trading at 20 times earnings. And if we were trading at 20 times earnings, our stock would be 14. However, we are trading at a price of 5, which is 8 times earnings, which I might point out is one of the lowest in the retail industry, if not absolutely in the basement. Now, why are we at 5 and Walmart's at 30 and Williams-Sonoma is at 25? That is a very important question. And the reason it's so important is that it really reflects two things. It reflects the consistency of earnings of our company, that is, the likelihood the earnings will continue to be consistent in the future, and it reflects the professionalism of our management. And I don't want you to think that I'm only concerned about the stock price, so I want to relate that for a moment, this issue of earnings, to a larger issue, which is growth. And I want you to think for a moment about the fact that we have grown over the years from this zero-size company 11 years ago to a $200 million company today because of the fact that our earnings grew. It was the earnings that said what we were doing was successful. And that was the confirmation in monetary terms that our catalog was working, that our product choices were working, that our stores were working. And it was the earnings that allowed us to mail more and more catalogs every year. And it was the earnings that allowed us to open up stores. Nobody gave us the money to open those stores. We took the money out of our earnings. And it was the earnings that allowed us to move into the offices that we're in right now and to hire the people that we have today and to have nice offices. I mean, it was all driven by the earnings. It doesn't mean that there aren't other things in life that are important, and certainly there are, ranging from how well we get along every day to whether we like the mission that we've set out to accomplish. But it's the earnings that ultimately are the measure of whether we can continue to expand the activity that we're engaged in. And if we have more earnings, we can continue to expand. And if we have less earnings, we have to contract. It's that simple. It's like any organism. If it's successfully growing, it continues to grow. And if it's learning that its growth is producing a negative result, it generally stops growing. And that's what we will eventually be faced with if our earnings don't grow. So it's very important to understand the concern that we must have when earnings don't grow, and that really is tied up in the stock price, and it's all really the same issue, because the stock is really a price-earnings ratio, but it happens to have two interesting components thrown in. How consistent is our earnings going to be in the future, and how professional is our management? And those directly bear upon what our earnings will be in the future. That's why they're so important in setting the price-earnings ratio. Because really, the people that buy and sell the stocks, the people that set a price-earnings ratio, they don't really care what we did 10 years ago. They really care about what we're going to do next week and next month and next year. That's why it's generally based on what they expect the earnings will be in the future, or how highly they regard the consistency of our earnings as opposed to what the earnings were 3 years ago. And that's why the professionalism of our management is valued so highly in setting the price-earnings ratio, because they know that's what's going to determine how successful we're going to be in the future. Who are these people? They're just analysts and people that follow stocks, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong, but their judgment's generally about as good as anyone's, I suppose. It's interesting. Did you notice that when we reported the best quarter we had ever had in our company history last December or last January, we finished it and we reported in March, the stock didn't go up at all. It didn't even move. I mean, we completed the best year we'd ever had in our company's history. We did better than anybody thought we would. They all predicted we'd earn 60 cents a share, and instead we earned 70. The stock did not go up at all. You know why it didn't go up? Expectation of future earnings consistency, professionalism of management. They didn't believe that we had some consistency out there in the future at that point, and they didn't believe that we had the professional management to make sure that that would come about. Now, they might have been wrong about the specifics of why it wasn't going to be consistent or how professional the management was, but they suspected something at that time which told them, don't raise the price-earnings ratio in this stock because this stock is going to have problems. Okay. Let's take another digression. Let's talk about I want to come back to this central theme. It's a real important theme, and I want to finish this presentation by talking about it. But I want to digress into what makes up earnings and expenses. Because we're talking so much about earnings, let's shift away from the philosophical here and get into some nuts and bolts of what are earnings and what are expenses. I think we all intuitively know this, but we sometimes forget some of the different things that make up these issues. Let's talk about earnings. In the simplest terms, earnings are income less expenses, right? I mean, we take in as much income as we can take in, and we deduct all the expenses that we incur, and what's left is our earnings. Fair enough? However, there are a lot of things which affect our business that may not seem to be income, such as when something comes back in the store and we give a credit instead of giving a refund. We give a merchandise credit instead of just giving them the money back. That indirectly becomes income. You think about it, because that store credit is turned back into another product, and we still have the sale, so we still have the income. Or if we give them back the cash, the transaction basically ends. And they may spend the money back later, but they don't. So indirectly, that's income. How about somebody who has a return that's 2 years old, and we give them the full money back 2 years later versus giving them a different product or even half of the refund because the product's way past the return privilege. I mean, indirectly, that contributes to our income, believe it or not. We don't think of it as income, but indirectly, it does become income. I mean, or putting it differently, if we give back the entire return 2 years later, we definitely deducted something from income. So it's the opposite. It's the same as income. It's just negative income. How about taking a defective product and a good box and another product that has a good product and putting that together and coming up with a solid product and a solid box and selling the product the next day in the store? I mean, that's income in a way versus taking the whole thing and just sending it all back to the manufacturer. I mean, it doesn't seem like income, but it is. How about a customer that walks in the store or calls up on telemarketing and we end up with a larger sale than we planned originally? I mean, that's certainly income. And that's really one of the easiest incomes, and yet I'm not sure if we all think about it as income. I mean, the salesperson certainly thinks of it as commission, but it's actually income to the company. It can be premium sales or list rentals or interest income. It can even be getting reimbursed for the work we do on our foreign licensees projects, where we bill them out for it, but do we really account for it? Do we really bill them out? Do we really collect? I mean, all that is income. And there are so many things in our company like that that is income, but it's sort of hidden under some other activity. We don't always think of it as income. Expenses can be equally surprising. I mean, generally we know what expenses are, but there's some that are a little bit trickier. Expenses can be people or supplies or services. And certainly we all know about people, and we know that we have good people, and we know that if they do a good job every day, we're happy with that and we're off to a good start. That sounds reasonable. But even that can be a little bit more subtle. And I started working out some numbers, and it really surprised me to work out some numbers. For example, we have about 1,000 people in our company today. And you know, in every company, there is a different level of people activity. Some people work all day from start to finish. Some people work 3/4 of the day and fill in the rest. Some people work 7/8 of the day. I mean, everybody has a different activity level, and every company is different. I remember so well when I first got to San Francisco, I was in an office supplies business. It was a very small business back then. It just had one employee. And so I would go out before 8:30 in the morning and deliver copy, paper, and toner to the offices that were my customers. This is back in like 1971, 1972. So when you see somebody coming in delivering like the paper and toner for the Xerox copier, that was me. Just 20 years, just turned back the clock 20 years ago. I was that guy coming in. You said, put it down over there. You know, that was me. And I would go in so many different offices in San Francisco, and I saw so many different levels of corporate activity. Some companies were very alert. Some companies were humming with some kind of electricity that you could feel when you walked in the office. Others, it was a little bit more relaxed. There's a wide range of human activity, and that is very much a function of the tone and the demeanor that the management of the company sets. Here's a number that is very unusual. Realize that we have 1,000 people nowadays. If every person managed to lose half an hour a day, 30 minutes a day in non-productive time, that adds up to what, 500 hours? 1,000 people, half an hour a day. Is that 500 hours a day? And I worked out a number on that. If you divided it by the number of hours in a workday, that's about 70 people a day that would have to work full time to equal 1,000 people losing a half an hour a day in non-productive time. Now, the half an hour could be looking for a file, it could be recomputing something, it could be straightening out a problem that was left screwed up by somebody else. I mean, it could be a lot of ways to lose half an hour. It could be a long lunch break, it could be socializing, it could be whatever you want it to be. And every human being will lose some time. I mean, that's just human nature. But whether you lose an hour a day or half an hour a day is the difference of whether we have 1,000 employees or 1,070 employees. And if you multiplied 70 employees by, say, 25,000 a year, counting the desk they sit at, the phone they use, the overhead, the workman's comp, you add up all that jazz, if it comes out to $25,000 a year per person, 70 people, it adds up to $1.7 million a year. That's exactly the amount of loss we had in the first 6 months of this year. So we could have wiped out our entire loss for the first 6 months of this year by just getting half an hour of productivity out of each person in this company. Or here's another one that's sort of interesting. This was brought to mind because the number that sticks in my mind is the number 4:59:59. That stands for 4:59 p.m. and 59 seconds. That's the exact moment where if you happen to be standing at the front door of our corporate office, you could get seriously injured by the people that managed to have the right foot crossing the threshold at exactly that moment on the clock. And I was thinking how funny it is that if they applied that level of accuracy and exactness to everything that we do in our company, we would have the most efficient fighting machine in the history of corporate America. Because somehow every day that calculation comes out exact. I mean, some people in this company are never 10 seconds late crossing the threshold. It's 4:59:59. And I thought, the difference in 15 minutes, whether they leave at 5 or 5:15, or maybe more realistically, whether they leave at 4:55 or 5:10, that difference, if you multiply it again by 1,000 people, adds up to about $750,000 a year, $750,000 a year. So the numbers really get large when you have a lot of people in a company, and we do. So that's another example of an expense, and it's not one we think of every day, but if you start calculating the numbers, you realize how quickly they get very large. Expenses are a lot of other things that we don't think of. Expenses are the accuracy that we take in telemarketing orders, in shipping from the distribution center. That accuracy costs us a lot of money if we don't do it well. I mean, we all know that. We know that the cost of double shipping, the cost of calling back to a customer to ask them if that's correct, the cost of the many correspondence and customer relations reps we have, it's all a function of the accuracy with which we do so many things. Record keeping, typesetting, you name it. It all adds up to a lot of the cost of redoing things and the time to redo it, that half an hour a day, every day. Accuracy in distributing products to stores, getting the right inventory in the right stores at the right time. That, as we know, can be a big difference in whether we make a sale or don't make a sale. Carrying a product with a high return rate or a high defect rate, that is a big cost, as we know. And we're just learning how much money we can save by cutting out defective products or cutting out products that have a high return rate. Wasting time redoing something. Boy, what a time waster that is. Just to redo the same thing we already did yesterday, we're just redoing it again because we didn't do it right the first time. Or doing something that maybe wasn't even necessary. It's just that somebody told us to do this, or somebody said, Richard wants this done, and no one really knows if it's necessary to do it, but they don't want to analyze it or don't feel they have the authority to question it, so they just do it. And sometimes that works to our detriment. Maybe it'd be better to go back to our manager and say to them, or encourage the people that work for you to ask, is this really necessary? Do I really need to do this again? There are so many things that we do that sometimes aren't necessary, because I see them myself. And all of these are indirect expenses. Quickly, let's list a few more. Supplies. Getting a better price, using a different supplier, not using the supply at all, sharing the supply, sharing a hotel room, canceling a subscription to a trade journal or a magazine that isn't necessary or that somebody else has one you can borrow. All these add up, and they're all different types of expenses that we don't think of sometimes as expenses. Services. Controlling cleaners, typesetters, guards, janitors, lawyers, all these things that we use so many times. We call up our lawyers and we ask them something because we don't even really think, is there a way to get this answer internally? Is there somebody else I can ask, or should I just spend the money? We don't really analyze it that way. We just go, well, my job is to call up the lawyer and let them decide. And that's fine a lot of the times. Other times it's not fine because it costs about $200 by the time they finish churning out their bill for every call we make. And one thing that's really clear, and I think you all understand this, is we are the managers. There's no one else but us and the managers in our retail stores, and we have to set the example. And if we tell the people that work for us, there's a better way to do this, there's a more efficient way to do this, we can do this more quickly, then they will understand that that's what you want, and people will do what is clearly described as what is expected if it's reasonable. And quite frankly, not only is it reasonable, it's a joy to have a group or a team or a department where things are going smoothly, where you want to tell them something and they understand right away and they translate it into action and they do it. I mean, that really is fun. I know for myself, I've never enjoyed being in this company more than just recently, because we have a group of people right now that are really a joy to work with. In our management group, it has never been quite this easy to communicate, to describe action that we want to have take place, and to have something occur as a result. And that really makes life fun. And in your own group, it's the same way. if you get people to do what you want them to do, they will work better and you will enjoy more having a smooth organization where, you all know the difference where you have some people that sort of take whatever you tell them and they just go do it. And then you have other people where they just sort of make a mistake or they ball it up, and then the next day 3 people are helping one person sort of finish what they were supposed to have done yesterday or straighten it out. That's so much of a drag compared to just having a group that works together well, everybody gets it done quickly, and it's fun. That's really an enjoyable way to have a business. So I guess the bottom line to that is we just have to go back and talk to the people in our departments and make them understand that we are going to get the result we want, which is that smooth working, efficient, quick organization, by being creative and by looking at the problems we have in front of us and by making decisions that are really better decisions and not accepting the past necessarily because it was the past, and realizing that time is money. Your time, their time. Think of the meetings you've been in where you had 5 people sitting around or more, and somebody's wasting everybody else's time, and nobody wants to be the one to tell them that it's time to call it to a halt. I don't know how often this happens in your groups, but I've seen some where somebody ought to just say, gee, this is really interesting, but it just isn't worth tying up 5 people's time doing this. So why don't we call this to a halt? Say it politely, or make sure the meeting doesn't occur again that way. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have meetings. It just means let's get on with it, because time is money. Everybody's time adds up to a lot of, and we talked about the half an hour a day. Now, I'm running a little bit over my time, so I think what I'd like to do is take a short break for 5 minutes, let you get a refreshment, stir a little bit, and then let's reassemble in 5 minutes and we'll conclude. All right? Make sure Michael put that off. All right.